There have probably always been scammers among us, even before humans created money and inequality and started trying to sell snake oil to each other. But it seems like our expectations that people are trying to scam us have morphed into a kind of realism about scammers and scamming, and that being a grifter has become okay. In their 2018 book, The Elephant in the Brain, Kevin Simler and Robin Hanson explore the ways that humans consciously and unconsciously deceive themselves and each other in order to attain wealth, status, and power. They weren't really talking about actual cheating and grifting, it was something much more subtle. They argue that we're all constantly evaluating and monitoring each other for signals that the other person is either a threat or an ally, a possible mating partner, a useful member of the group. It's just how we deal with strangers, the unknown, just like any animal is wary when encountering another. And since we're sizing each other up in this way, we know that others are watching us for the same signs. So there's a big incentive for us to project a cooperative, pro social image, masking competitive desires for status and power, even though that's what we really want. Simler and Hansen also note, however, that if you act like a friend and behave like a foe too many times, or if you just generally lay it on a little too thick, people don't believe you anymore and you end up losing social status anyway. So there's a balance there. And there's still an incentive to push it as far as you can. So, for example, acting like a team player at work and being friendly to your coworkers while, in the background taking credit for others' work and relating negative gossip and things like that. They also show that this pattern occurs not just at the individual level, but at the level of institutions as well. So you have political parties claiming to support one or another group, and maybe even believing themselves that they do support those people while their policies are actually detrimental to the interests of that group. But in the information environment of 2026, it feels like all of this got thrown into a blender, and that just existing in the current information ecosystem means having to chug down snake oil and serve it up to each other every day. In Mark Fisher's 2009 book, Capitalist Realism Is There No Alternative? He talks about how capitalism has come to be accepted as inevitable and a natural fact of life, similar to the weather, rather than a political choice like a set of laws and norms that we could change if we wanted to. And as a result, most of us are just resigned to living in capitalism. It guides our thinking, it shapes our choices. It's kind of the operating system for the world. So to me, what seems to have emerged from that is that we've all become somewhat okay with a fairly high level of ambient grifting, to the point where we're all somewhat okay doing it ourselves too, doing it to each other. We can see this in our kayfabe politics, where politicians spin, obfuscate, and outright lie without any repercussions, and we kind of know they're doing it, but everybody's okay with it somehow. And where social media influencers hawk nonsense nutritional supplements and the modern snake oil. But I think there's a lot more subtle version of it to something a little more similar to what Simler and Hansen talk about in The Elephant in the Brain. And I might be sort of stretching their thesis here, but we have to do it just to have a job now. And the other day I bought this. This is Neutrogena hyaluronic acid gel cream that I bought at a local drugstore. It's what it is. I'm a bald man. I need to put this on my head and face. It's what happens. But I saw this stuff on sale, and I remember that it came well recommended by the New York Times Wirecutter, which is a reliable product review site in my experience. So, just take a look at the packaging. So it might not show up great on camera here, but someone went out of their way to make this packaging misleading. And, lots of companies do this. There are these little spacers in the box that you can see here that kind of, they make the box look deeper. So, and they're at the bottom as well. So the box looks bigger than the actual container in the package. And so, here's the box, here's the package. Didn't need to be that big, right? And, even the picture makes the dimensions of the the container look different, right? So all of this is just sort of trying to get me to think that I'm getting more product in the box than I actually got. And it, mildly pissed me off. So, but of course it's a small thing. I get it. Yeah, and we encounter this all the time. There's shrinkflation at the grocery store. A pint of beer isn't a pint of beer anymore. But when I thought about it, the Neutrogena products are made by a U.S. company called Kenvue. And Kenvue has an office right here in Guelph, Ontario, where I live. So a packaging designer at Kenvue deliberately designed this packaging to misrepresent the amount of product that people would get for the price. And, it's possible that I've seen this person at the grocery store, at a restaurant. They could live down the street from me. Or if you live where there's an office too, they could live where you are. And, this isn't a condemnation of Kenvue per se, its employees or their product specifically. It's actually pretty nice moisturizer. But I'm sure the people who work there are very nice. They have families that they just want to make a living. They want to be safe and secure and spend time with loved ones, just like you and me. But a real person at Kenvue directed another real person to make the packaging misleading. And me, another real person, bought it thinking that I'd get much more product than I actually did. Would these people send their kids off to school with half a sandwich with a piece of crumpled up paper where the other sandwich should be? Of course they're not going to do that. But, I'm a stranger, a customer, an abstraction. You don't really know. I don't know who's watching this video. And in some way you're an abstraction, the viewer. So you can see how this detachment's kind of built in, but still at some point they must realize that a real person is buying this, and someone that, again, could be their neighbor. And so I started thinking about all the times in my career that I had to do and say things that I knew weren't really true. The value proposition was a little bit loose and kind of suspect. Times where I had to follow plans that seemed kind of dishonest, and sign off on marketing copy that pushed the truth a little bit. And of course, this little jar of moisturizer is insignificant compared to the disgusting orange grifter who is the president of the United States, responsible for the deaths of a school full of little girls in Iran. But that's the thing. It's at every level. We can't get away from it. And today, millions of people around the world will do and say things they don't believe, things that go against their stated views and their values in order just to get money to live, Uber says they're not a taxi service, they're ride sharing. Facebook, no, we're not a publishing platform that shows you ads while you look at news and entertainment. No, this is user-generated content. It's totally different. And no, groceries are more expensive because of the supply chain issues. Yeah, not profiteering that is just driving up grocery store profits. And I don't think the people, the rank and file at these companies are monsters. Everybody has to make a living, and profits need to increase, apparently. Number must go up. But all of this has a cost. It's an ocean full of plastic, a warming planet, horrible rates of teen depression and suicide. And so I ask, why do we do this to each other? I know this sounds hopelessly naive or unrealistic, but this ambient grift of everyday existence just sort of chafes at me after a while. And I think my response, and that of some of you listening, will be some version of, this is reality, this is the way it is. But I think that's like the Mark Fisher capitalist realism stuff. Ideology's at work here, and it's not normal or inevitable that we all act this way in the marketplace. Every religion and creed, every positive philosophy, every fictional story or tale tells us that this isn't the way the world should work, that liars don't profit. And yet this is exactly the way the world works. And, I get the intellectual response, the postmodern response that we should think in systems, and the system kind of forces us into this. And I think that's a big part of the truth here. But at some point, it has to also be about human consciousness and our ideas about what we're here to do on this planet. Is it to sort of get rich at others' expense, and so I can have quartz countertops or something? I don't, we keep doing things we know are wrong just to kind of make a living and profit, and then consume, I guess. But so I don't want to get into the point where I'm in some sort of detached framing or jaded pseudo-intellectual compartmentalization to detach me from what this is, that this is lying for money. And it's insanity.